So when my brother and I were growing up, we had our different characters. Michael, my little brother, was the naughty one, and I was the good boy. You might find that hard to, but yeah. Well, maybe we don't believe that. I don't know, but it was true, I think. And but my little brother Michael, he was very mischievous. He was a lot of fun. But he always used to get in all kinds of scrapes and like get in all sorts of trouble. If something wasn't to be broken, it would get broken, and all of those things. So have my mum tearing her hair out. Now, when he turned about 3.5, he went through this phase, and I don't know if many kids go through this phase where he started to mooning everyone. You know, when you pull your trousers down and show your bum. And by the way, if you're wondering, do I have his permission to tell this story? No. But he's my little brother, so it's okay. And so he went through this phase, but it was okay when it was indoors, because it was indoors, and Mum would just say, stop doing that, and he'd be like, whatever. But one time, and it was the last time he ever did it, we were walking down Barking Road, in Canning Town. Walking down Barking Road, and you see that look on his face, a big smile, and he decides, I'm going to do it here. So he pulls his trousers down and moons in public. Let's just say the experience made sure it was the last time it ever happened to him, if you know what I mean, because bums are big targets. So he grew out of that phase pretty quick, but it didn't stop his behaviour. He was still quite scatty, to the point where my mum thought, I've got to take him to the doctor. Maybe there's something we can do to address his behaviour. He's quite mischievous. So she took him to the doctor, and she described what was going on. And the doctor sort of rubbed his chin for a bit and said, what's his diet like? What kind of foods does he enjoy? And she said, well, he loves soft drinks, he loves sweets, and he particularly loves chocolate. He eats chocolate all the time. So the doctor said, okay, take away the chocolate, take away the sweets, take away the soft drinks, and see what happens. Now you can imagine for about a week, that was a really big struggle to take those things away from him. But when the chocolate and the sweets and the drinks were taken away, his behaviour started to change. He started to become a little bit more attentive. So he would listen to Mum when she was speaking to him. He started to behave well even in public. It was like having a new child. He was still a bit crazy now. But the difference was quite stark. So a lot of that was down to what he was doing around his diet, the environment that he was being brought up in. So in today's first reading, you have the people of Israel receiving commands. God gives them the 10 commandments. But they are receiving those 10 commandments in the desert. They have been removed from the environment which they were in before they could hear and act upon the commands God gave them. They had come from Egypt, where they were slaves, where even in their slavery they had picked up bad customs. They had, some of them, fallen into the worship of false idols. They had adopted some of the practices of the Egyptians which were not in accord with the law that God gave them. So God, in order to help them to hear and to obey, removes them. He takes them away, or takes something away from them, so that they can hear these commandments. And most of us, all of us, know what these 10 commandments are and how they run. I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. The people of Egypt had loads of gods, so we can understand why that came in. Don't take the Lord's name in vain. Honor the Sabbath and keep it holy. Honor your mother and father. Do not kill, do not cheat, and so on and so forth. But the last two of those commandments, they're a bit different from the rest. And they're ones that we often don't even think about or focus on, because they kind of come to the end, and we've got past the juicy ones of killing and cheating and stealing, so we kind of forget them. But they're really, really important because they're different. And if they're different, there must be a reason. And they are, thou shalt not covet thy neighbour's wife, and thou shalt not covet thy neighbour's goods. In fact, they go in the reverse order. What is different about those two commands to the rest? The other 8 were commandments to not do something or to do something. There was something you could do. But the last 2 commandments are about behaviour inside. It's about what you feel before you act. God is saying, don't covet your neighbour's wife. In other words, relationships, not just their wife. relationships, that person's popularity. Don't desire after that, and don't covet thy neighbour's goods. Don't let your jealousy make you into someone who is resentful for someone's material prosperity. Don't let your heart be won over by this resentfulness. And that is really, really important. We could flip the commandments on their head and understand why God gave the other 8. Because if we don't obey these 2, if we don't let these 2 commands find a place in our hearts, then it opens the door to everything else. We begin to forget what we were made for. Those 2 commandments are all about the power of envy and what it can do in our lives if we let it consume us. See, we often think of jealousy and envy as the same thing, don't we? But they're not. See, in today's first reading, what does God say about himself? The Lord your God is a jealous God. So can jealousy be completely bad? Well, I hope not, because that's saying something negative about God that we can't admit and that we won't. Jealousy can be good, and it can be good in a really positive way. Jealousy is when we see someone's skill, ability, maybe their prosperity or their relationships or whatever they have, and we say to ourselves, I wish I had that, I want that. And a positive attitude to that is to go and get it. You know? At school, what lifted my grades was seeing someone else with better grades than me. So I worked harder. So a B turned into an A, and someone had an A star, I'm going to go and get that A star. That's how jealousy can be good. That's what God does with the people of Israel. He removes them from the pagan gods and gives himself to them because he's a jealous and loving God. So it can be good. Envy, what these 2 commandments concern themselves with, can never be good. Because envy is when you see the prosperity of another person, their possessions, their signs of success, or their relationships, and because you can't have them, you would rather they didn't have them. That's how dangerous envy can be. It's the sin linked to pride, which says, I'm okay where I am, and everyone else is going to be as miserable as me. That's how damaging envy can be. Envy leads to adultery. Envy leads to murder. Envy causes us to forget God, because the devil was envious. It leads to all the other 8 commandments being disobeyed. So if you forget these 2, and we let envy take control of our hearts, then we walk into the other 8 as blind men and women. Jesus, in today's gospel, shows us the way. You see, he walks into a temple that took 46 years to build. You notice what they say. And he goes around and smashes everything up. Jesus worshipped in this temple, so he had nothing against the temple. He had everything against the attitude which had been allowed to ferment in that place. What you had there was an institutionalized observance of the law. Sacrifices were offered there. The laws and the commands were given. This is what you must do from on high. Everything had been surrounded by walls. The exterior observance of the law was being kept, but inside, people were still rotting. Things were still falling apart. And Jesus goes around to symbolically smash all of this up. And they say, what are you doing? Because he's taking away the facade of everything they hold dear. And he says to them something strange. He says to them, destroy this sanctuary and I will rebuild it in 3 days. They think of the sanctuary that they've built. But he's talking about himself. In other words, if you destroy me out of envy, I will raise up and become even more powerful. I will be raised up and become a sign that someone and people can emulate. Someone can follow and do greater things than these, as he says elsewhere in the gospel. So he is laying down a challenge. He says, no more can we keep service observance and say that's enough. No longer, with the mirror of Jesus held up to us, can we pretend we're doing okay when this feeling festers in our hearts. No longer can this be the law of our lives. Jesus is the law unto himself. And when we receive his Spirit, we become a law unto ourselves. Because the soul, won over by Jesus, does not envy. And if it does, it fights against it. It sees in the achievements of others signs of blessing and wishes to share in those blessings. It sees in their own blessings things not to be held on to themselves, but to be shared with all those around. That's the making of Christian community. That's what makes us brothers and sisters. If you are at the top, then people can rise up to you and you can help them. If you are at the bottom, you have brothers and sisters ready to raise you up. And so we have an examination of conscience to conduct in this next few weeks. Remember, in the first week of Lent, we talked about journeying to those dark places in our lives, going into the wilderness as Jesus enters the desert, about exploring those places in our lives where we would rather not go, so that Jesus can shine his light on them. Last week, we talked about the great sacrifice. You know that place we go to in prayer, or that thing that pops into our head? We say we give God everything, but there's one thing we hold back. It's in there in all of us. It was in there in Abraham. He wouldn't give Isaac to God, and it caused Isaac not to be free. And he had to be set free by God. This week, we look at that sin of pride, of envy, and we begin to explore it in our own lives. How has envy enraptured my heart? Now, we might think, well, I'm not envious of anyone. Well, I'm going to take issue with that by taking issue with myself. I think envy is the oldest and the most pernicious of sins. And in one way or another, it has us in its grasp, but it doesn't have to. Envy can play itself out in so many ways. I'll give you an example. So you've got someone at work you don't get along with. You know, you find it hard. And everything they do sort of irritates you, you know. Maybe it's, I don't know, it could be anything. But you get that's life though, isn't it? Some people we just clash with. And then you're getting a coffee in the break. And you've heard a rumor about this person. And you start to share it. Or you hear that they're earning just a bit more than you. And so you start to talk about it to someone else. You know, oh, this person is getting a bit more. God, what have they done to deserve that? And it starts to spiral out of control. You can see even those little things, those little conversations can take us to a place which leads to murder. It can. And I don't just mean physical murder. Hopefully we haven't got any murderers in here, like convicted ones anyway. But by talking about someone in a negative way, from a place of malice and place of envy, we risk murdering their reputation. We risk murdering the heart and the soul of the person that we're sharing this information with because we involve them in our own envy, and it brings everyone down around us. And at the same time, it builds a wall around us, because when someone says, you did this, you go, who, me? That's how envy can work in our lives. And I'm sure we can think of times on most of the sins of envy I remember on the school playground. I don't know why that is. So it doesn't matter your age. It affects each and every one of us. So let's explore that for the next few weeks. Let's explore how this sin, this thing, this affliction which gets us all, connects to every other area of our lives. Because what we want to do is we want to bring it all out and show it to the Lord. Because when we bring it all out and show it to the Lord, he can begin to heal us, go to the root of our problem and grow within us from the ground up. On the 27th of, if I'm going to see a slide there in a second, on the 27th of March, so during Holy Week, 7:30 p.m, we have our reconciliation service. So this is a chance for us to, after weeks of exploration, of examination of conscience, to bring these things to the Lord. To bring our affliction to the Lord, confess it to him, and be free of it, so that we can be ready for the joy of the resurrection on Easter Sunday. Now you might be thinking, oh gosh, but Father James, I don't really see him all the time. I don't want him knowing my sins. See it on your faces now. That's fine. That's why we have a reconciliation service, so that there are many priests, so that you can choose to be as anonymous as you like. Because ultimately, the encounter in reconciliation isn't between you and a priest, but rather it's an encounter with you through the priest to God, enabling you to name your sins to yourself so that you may be aware of God's healing presence in your life, changing you from within. So that's in just over 3 weeks' time. No, just over 3 weeks' time. Let's take this time to prepare, to go a bit further in the wilderness, to begin journeying to the roots of our problems, of the conflict inside, and allow the healing power of Jesus to raise us up with him. Amen.